Hi everyone, my name is Oyelam Temitokpa Ibidoni, and I'm a digital engineering student. I'll be the one to anchor today's interview. With me here is one of our professors from the Faculty of Computer Science. Can we meet you, please?
Good morning. Hello, my name is Sebastian Stober. I'm the head of the Artificial Intelligence Lab at the Faculty of Computer Science. My research is focused on deep learning techniques applied in various contexts. First of all, we're looking at activity that has been recorded from the brain and trying to understand what's going on there using deep learning. We're also interested in speech-based interactions, all these personal assistants that you see in mobile devices, for instance. And then we're also looking at how to analyze and generate music with deep learning techniques.
Interesting. So in today's interview, we focus on the course Learning Generative Models. Can you give a brief overview of this course?
All right, yes. So the course is a follow-up course to the lecture Introduction to Deep Learning, where students will have learned of the basic techniques of training deep neural networks for various tasks, and they've learned all about the architectures. And then in this follow-up course, we will look at very new modern extension of deep learning that's called generative deep learning. So that started around 5 years ago. So it's very avant-garde still. There's a lot of ongoing research, but there have been very promising results already. And so this is all about models that learn to approximate the probability distribution in the data set. And that way they can actually generate new data that looks like the data from your training set. And there are lots of really interesting applications for that. For instance, sometimes you might not have like training data that represents everything, right? So imagine you want to detect anomalies. Let's say you have a power plant and you want to figure out when something's going wrong. You would, like with the traditional machine learning, deep learning approaches, you would have to collect data when things go wrong. Usually you don't have this, and you don't want to cause something going wrong just to get the data, right? So that's a bit tricky with the standard methods, but here with the generative models, they can actually just learn from the positive examples and then detect anomalies because they are not likely anymore, another model. Right. And then there's a whole lot of really interesting applications in the creative media domain, where we see, for instance, generation of like soundtracks for videos, for instance, or even like adaptive soundtracks for computer games, right? Where you don't know what people will be doing in advance, so you cannot pre-compose everything, right? And then a generative model will act like something like an intelligent conductor that gets trained by the actual person who composes the soundtrack, and then will be able to basically conduct on the fly based on what's happening, right? So there's some really exciting new directions. We also see this nowadays in many applications where text is generated. So for instance, like reporting on sports events is nowadays very much automated already, or like on the stock exchange or weather forecasts. Those models can already create texts at the same level as a person, right? So there are many interesting applications of it, but the problem is those models are actually quite complicated, right? So it's a very advanced course that looks at this, basically.
Yeah, indeed it is. You already talked about the application areas, because I was going to ask you about the prospect of this course for students who successfully completed it. But you already mentioned...
industry is very interested in this, right? So you have the whole quality assurance domain, where you want to figure out whether something was produced in the right way, whether it meets certain criteria, right? You have the creative domain. Also, like people who produce media are playing around with these as like powerful tools for being more creative. So artists are working with this, but this is still in an exploratory phase, I would say. So in industry, there is this strong demand for quality checking, but like in the creative domain, it's still very explorative. But there are startups coming up and very interesting business ideas that come up. So you could be part of that wave. You could develop your own business idea, like if you're into that. but there are not that many jobs on the market yet for that specific thing, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about in the research area? Okay, yeah.
That's a good point, actually. In research, there are some really nice applications as well. So we actually, for instance, have already projects using these techniques to model, for instance, the movement of amoeba. I don't know how to pronounce this. So these small cellular animals that you can watch from a microscope. And they are moving in funny ways. And so you can model the movement using generative models, for instance. And lots of other scientific data can be modeled using generative models as well, which will enable people to get insights about the data as well. So there are also very interesting scientific applications.
Interesting. For a student who has successfully completed only this, when you were talking the other time, you said it's an advanced course for any student who has completed Introduction to Deep Learning.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it sufficient? I mean, are these two courses sufficient for a student to approach you for a master thesis topic?
You mean that learning generative models is sufficient? Yeah, sure, of course.
Okay.
You could also do a master's thesis just after Introduction to Deep Learning.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to just apply deep learning, plain deep learning, that's sufficient, right? But if you want to dig deeper into generative models, then you would have to hear the generative models.
Okay, but is Introduction to Deep Learning a compulsory prerequisite for learning generative?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I would be willing to make exceptions if people like coming in and they can prove that they took proper courses on deep learning, so they know the basics. Because I can't just teach them the deep learning while we do learning generative models. That would be way too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you offer students projects like the project, project?
Yeah. So we have lots of projects, ideas for this, right? People can also come up with their own ideas, obviously, and I'd really encourage this because then they will be very excited about this and motivated to do their project. But we also have ideas for projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I want to really get this straight. Other than Introduction to Deep Learning, or maybe having an idea of maybe deep learning in general, are there any other mandatory requirements? No other ones?
If you did well on Introduction to Deep Learning, that's all you need to do the second lecture.
Okay. Then over the years, you would have noticed a kind of trend in the mistakes students make.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe during the exams, before the exams, or after they complete this course. What are the common trends you can see in this mistakes students make?
Well, I mean, like with this lecture, it's not so problematic anymore because it's like the second lecture after Introduction to Deep Learning, and it follows the same principle. It's an inverted classroom lecture, so people have to prepare. But if you've taken Introduction to Deep Learning successfully, you know how that works. Okay. So usually people don't make those mistakes, right? So they're well prepared. We have a lot of really exciting discussions in class, very, very good discussions, very lively discussions. And so I'm not worried there too much, actually. People are pretty good at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do they have programming assignment?
Yes, we have programming assignment. We're using TensorFlow and Python.
Okay.
But also this is something you will learn in Introduction to Deep Learning, and then we basically extend this to new kinds of models. Okay. I mean, the programming you've picked up already in the prerequisites.
For this assignment, the students work in groups or individually in groups?
Yeah.
And you put them in groups, or they have to look for groups themselves?
No, they can do that themselves.
What if a student doesn't find a group?
Well, they can also work alone, but it's going to be more work. And the idea is that students help each other, right? So a lot of the stuff is so extremely new that I have to read the literature just before I'm teaching it. So it will be very fresh. Maybe I don't have the full understanding of it yet. So we will have a lot of discussion about the details. Why is it this way? Or how did you understand this? And it's kind of like we're learning everybody together. And so I don't see people individually, but I see the group there.
The group there.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have some strategies that you can suggest to students to perform better?
Strategies, yeah. So, I mean, like from my own studies, what I recall is I was usually, it was easy for me to follow a course when I was excited about the topic. right? If you really care about it, if you're curious, if you're investigating, you're trying, exploring things, I think this mindset is really helpful. And also like a kind of like a critical mindset is helpful, right? So don't take everything for granted. As I said, I might not have fully understood everything. So I tend to make mistakes myself. So please question what I'm saying and come up with critical questions. Even sometimes when I'm still right, the question actually gives us a hint of what could be misunderstood. And you might not be the only person who has this misunderstanding, right? So this will really help to clarify things for everybody.
So for a student who is still contemplating on maybe whether this course is for them or not, but maybe a part of them would really like to go into this area, do you have some word of motivation for them to motivate them to really go for this course?
Wow. Okay. I think we will see a lot of great progress in machine learning from generative models. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. The last couple of years have already been a very exciting trip. So I remember, again, like 5 years ago, I saw Ian Goodfellow present the generative adversarial models. And like 2 years later, there were thousands of papers already using this technique. And it's crazy, the development there. And it's going to have, I think, a huge impact on machine learning because it's a different way of unsupervised learning. And unsupervised learning means you only have data without labels. So sheep data. You just look at the world and then the model learns like how the world looks like and models the world, basically. And it's a very powerful approach to learning. And so I think there will be some big milestones ahead of us with these techniques. So I think it's a good idea to learn about them.
Go for it.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much for your time and
You're
the
welcome.
information you have given. We really appreciate it. Thank you.